All right, everyone, welcome back to the Healthy Body Podcast. I'm your host, Brianna Wilkerson, holistic health and life coach, essentials advocate, and CrossFit Level 1 trainer. And today we are continuing our discussion on digestion and gut health, which I love talking about so much, yet sometimes it feels like it's so awkward to talk about for people because they just think about, I'm going to say it, poop. But it's so much more than that, right? It's just your immune system, so much of it is linked to your digestive health. So I wanted to bring in a couple experts, and Andrea is one of those. And so thank you so much for joining us today to talk about digestion.
Yes, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Yay, I'm excited to have you.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I'm Andrea Dahlman. I am a nutritional therapy practitioner and a restorative wellness practitioner. And my area of expertise is really digestive health. So I help clients who are feeling out of balance, suffering from things like bloating or constipation, diarrhea, IBS. I see Crohn's and colitis, and I've even had colon cancer clients. So I've seen the gamut of digestive dysfunction. But how I even came into this work was my own digestive story. As many of us who are health practitioners and healers, we have our own personal story, and that's I'm no different from that. In 2011, I started to experience some severe pain in my side, like just so terrible. It was debilitating at points, and I mean, gosh, I was just having this really bad cramp, and it was high. Of course, doctors are like, oh, it's probably just PMS or it must be your ovary. But I was like, no, it's higher. It's higher. It's just something different. So after kind of pushing my doctor a few times, he's like, okay, well, why don't you, we'll send you over to the gastroenterologist and we'll see what they say. And I went in and they said, okay, well, we're going to need to do a colonoscopy. And at this time I was, in my 40s and early 40s. And I thought, gosh, it seems kind of young for a colonoscopy, but okay, so let's go in and, learn what we can learn. For those of you who've had a colonoscopy, you know that the prep is horrible. It is like the worst experience ever. But I went in and I was sitting in the waiting room and had the colonoscopy, came out, get the results, and they basically tell me, you're fine. We didn't see anything in there. There's nothing going on. It's basically, I felt like he was saying, it's all in your head. You just need to eat more fiber and drink more water. And I, at that point, was a pretty healthy eater. So I didn't really understand how just, increasing my water more was going to be potentially helpful. I was already drinking what was the appropriate amount. So not feeling satisfied with that, I really, wanted a different type of answers. And that's what kind of pushed me to leave the work that I was doing before and start in and go back to school and become a nutritional therapy practitioner. And it was more than just the fiber and the water that was my issue. It came up that and we'll discuss a little bit of this, but the way I was eating was impactful. The amount of stress that I had in my life was affecting my digestion. And I definitely had other things that I needed to be working on. And I had a surgery on I had a herniated belly button. And what happened partially too was when they corrected the herniated belly button, they created some adhesions. And so my colon I had to do a lot of massage, and that's not something that was even discussed or talked about with the GI doctor. So not only did I need to make some lifestyle changes, I needed to put in some other modalities and therapies to help create a more holistic approach to my digestive health. But that's how I came into the work. And I've been doing my nutritional therapy practice now for 7 years. But digestion has really been kind of the main focus, because nothing excites me more than if somebody wants to run a stool panel and then I get the results back and I get to see what their stool looks like. And I'll run one on myself every once in a while if nobody's, we're not in a season where I'm doing that, just to check on my own digestive health. So it's a very good tool for, to be able to use to help people and understand, you have a really healthy diet, but is what is happening from, the top to the bottom, is everything still working right? So.
Right. So important. I know, like, we're talking about poop or stool, but there's, I don't know if you know Diane Sanfilippo. She wrote the book Practical Paleo, and it's very visual. And
Yes.
in it, I love the I love the printout that just like, what type of poop do you have? And it's like the different shapes and all that's like dressed up, and like the struggling poop. They're very good. And I just think I think, it's such obviously a private thing, I think there's one thing, okay, digestion, then there's excretion, right? And so just understanding that whole process, it's actually one of the most loving things you can do for your health, is actually to find out when it comes out, like, is it actually the way it should be? Because it's an indicator of what you're saying, that other stuff is going on.
Right. And when I run stool panels on myself or for other people, well, I'm actually surprised at how many people, when I do because I always do a client intake, and I'm like, okay, we're going to have the poop conversation now. And some people are kind of squirmy and they don't want to really talk about it. But once we really start discussing like how much information is in there, like in your stool, it can be a little treasure trove of, understanding, are you digesting your fats well? Are you digesting your carbohydrates well? How much protein is actually, you might be eating a lot of protein, and your blood work is like, your blood lab protein is off, and you're like, what's going on? And it has to do with the fact that your body's not actually assimilating that nutrition in. So you get a lot of information. You get to see the health of the whole digestive system, like if there's inflammation, or understanding if there's anything that's in there that shouldn't be in there. Unfortunately, I've found some not so fun things lately, like Giardia and worms and parasites in clients. And it's more common than people would like to, know about. The client that had worms, she was like, how soon can we get these to be gone? And
Yes.
Like, yeah, I get it. It's not something that's comfortable, but part of that is like, as we kind of talk through this, is that healthy digestion is foundational to your overall health. And if we don't have an understanding, I like to say, from your fork to your flesh, we don't know what's going on in that whole process, then every cell is being impacted. Like it's really important for you to have, to eat good food and to have a balanced diet and really super nutrient dense and whole and all of that. But if your digestive system is inflamed or out of balance and you can't actually absorb that nutrition, it's not really, really hard for you to advance your health or to feel like you're living a healthy life.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. So talk to us a little bit about that fork to flesh. Like, what are some of the things that we should know, the basics about digestion, that we all should just kind of understand and practice?
Right. I like to use a lot of word illustrations for clients so that it makes sense to them. And the big thing is I like to use is a construction site. So we've all seen like new construction go in, and if there's homes being built around, it's, you really have to have level land. You need to have all of the foundation really solid, and then all the materials for the house have to arrive at the appropriate time, so that when at the end it's a home that you would want to move into. If you're, for whatever reason the nails didn't show up and you had to use staples to build your house, it's not a really strong house. The wind starts blowing, then that's where, the home, it becomes compromised. And that's the same for us. So, it's important for us to have good nutrition going in, and those are the building materials. But if the ground isn't level and the foundation hasn't been built out, and that's your digestive tract, then those other things are, a home built on a faulty foundation is not going to stand. One earthquake or one windstorm or one anything, and it's going to come down. So quality materials in the right order, quality home to live in. And so that's really what we're trying to achieve with digestive health. And when someone has like nutritional deficiency or poor health, it's usually due to not eating a nutrient dense diet. So that's the first thing we look at. I need to see a food journal. Food journals are really telling. We'll come back to that more towards the end, but I always suggest, like, if you're having digestive health issues, that's an important place to start, is looking at what you're eating. But if your diet is really well, then you have to look at the pieces and parts of the digestive system, and are they really absorbing? So I like to say, you can eat the best diet in the world, but if your body can't absorb the nutrients, you'll still be compromised. I have friends that are in the health and wellness field, and they want to harp on like whole food, and whole food and nutrient dense is so very important, but it's meaningless in a dysfunctional digestive system. So we really have to work on balancing that first. It's key to creating overall health. Optimal, like what does optimal digestion look like? I like to walk through this kind of north to south process, and it really does start in our brain. So when you see food, your brain sends a signal to your mouth to start creating saliva. And so when you put that food in your mouth and you mix it in the chewing process, which we don't spend enough time doing, is chewing. Our saliva has something called salivary amylase in it, and those help start breaking down the foods. And digestion, in being a north to south process, it's a domino effect. So every domino has to get clicked so that the next step can happen. Okay. So when you chew your food and the saliva is making that salivary amylase, it's signaling to your stomach, it's time to start making hydrochloric acid. So hydrochloric acid is a digestive juice in your stomach that converts something called pepsinogen into pepsin, and that breaks down proteins. But it starts with chewing. So some of it, and this is even true for a smoothie. So like a lot of us will be like, oh, I drink green smoothies. I'm all for green smoothies, but you have to chew it because the saliva really still has to be part of the process. So once that food gets swallowed and it gets down into the stomach mixes that food and coats it in that acidic bath, that hydrochloric acid, and it breaks it down and it cleans pathogens out of it. So that's why you hear that famous saying, 5-second rule, like if you drop something on the ground, it's hydrochloric acid that allows you to have the 5-second rule, because that's going to kill anything that potentially could be harmful to you. And so that's really an important piece, is that hydrochloric acid. It sounds scary. People hear acid and they get freaked out, but it's supposed to live in the stomach. The stomach has this beautiful mucosal lining that protects the lining of the stomach, and it's supposed to be there. So once the food reaches kind of the end of the stomach, there's a sphincter called the pyloric sphincter, and it has to be acidic in there of a pH of 1 to 3 in order for that pyloric sphincter to open. If it's not, the pyloric sphincter actually stays closed. So once that sphincter opens and the food gets pushed into the first part of the small intestine, which is called the duodenum or duodenum, depending on who you talk to, that's really still acidic. And so the pancreas sends over something called cholecystokinin and secretin to help kind of sodium bicarbonate to neutralize that chyme, the broken down food. And then the other enzymes go to work and start creating and breaking down that food even more. So there's like this constant process of like, we're breaking it down in our mouth, we're breaking it down in our stomach, and then the first part of the small intestine, we're breaking it down again. And the cholecystokinin triggers the gallbladder to release bile. So your liver makes bile, and the bile gets stored into the gallbladder, and it has this little tube that goes down into your stomach, into your small intestine, and it emulsifies it. So it makes it like little droplets instead of it being in larger. So when all the food gets broken down in the small intestine, it's like, and after it leaves the duodenum, they're like these tiny little molecules, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want when it reaches the middle part, which is the jejunum in the small intestine, because in the jejunum, there's these finger-like protrusions called villi, and the villi go and they grab out those nutrients and transfer them into the blood, and they're supposed to travel through that cell. So that's really important, that they are small enough that they can travel through that cell. And this cell of the inside lining of your stomach, like the villi, there are millions of villi. In fact, if we took your small intestine and unfolded it end on end and undid it, it's like a shag carpet in there, it would fill a tennis court. That is how much real estate is in the small intestine. It's an amazing amount of space. So, and it's very delicate because it's really our kind of the contact of the outside world to our inside world, to us at the cellular level. So we want the integrity of that small intestine to stay really, really strong. When the food there's like this peristalsis, this beautiful movement of peristalsis, which means it's the squeezing. So after the villi kind of squeeze it down to the last part of the small intestine called the ileum, there's a little valve. This is a one-way valve, and it's called the ileocecal valve, and it pushes the food into the first part of the colon, so your ascending colon. And the colon has beneficial bacteria that eat any insoluble fiber that didn't get broken down, and actually feeds the beneficial flora. That's food for the beneficial flora. And then it converts some of those nutrients into converts some of that waste into usable nutrients. So that could be like vitamin K or some B vitamins, butyric acid, really important. And then it gets pushed up across to the transverse and then the descending colon. And at that point, it's starting to form stool, and it will hang out in the sigmoid colon and wait for elimination. That's the way everything should work. That's the ideal part of the ideal way that the digestion, but so many things. I mean, there's so many pieces of that get hiccup or there's stuff that can go wrong in that process. Let me take a drink of water.
I'm loving this.
It's so fascinating because we just eat something and then, 12 hours later. Well, and people ask me, they'll say, what's optimal digestion time? Like what would be from transit time from north to south? What's optimal? And typically it's between 12 and 16 hours. Some people run a little bit faster and some run a little bit slower. And a way to test this would be for anybody that doesn't have like diverticulitis or inflammatory bowel disease. So if you know for sure that you don't have either of those, then you're safe to do this little test. But you take 2 tablespoons of white sesame seeds, and you put them in 3 ounces of water. Stir it up. Don't chew. This is one time when you're not going to chew, and you can swallow them. You're going to write down the day and time that you like. Monday at 11:30, I swallowed these seeds. Then you're going to watch in your stool for the first time you see them and the last time you see them. And that's going to really give you a good sense of like, what's your transit time? Mm-hmm. If you find that your transit time is really quick, like you see it in 6 hours, that can be a sign that there's something disrupted in the digestive system. Or if you're like, wow, it was 3 days before I saw those sesame seeds, that also can be a sign that things are not optimal. Mm. So that's a test that you can do at home to check your own transit time. I always tell if you have family and kids, that kids love that. They love to participate in this little experiment. So that's really how digestion should work. But there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Mm-hmm. And so let's go through a few of those. Like what can go wrong. And the first one is, looking at my notes, your brain isn't connected to your digestion, meaning that you're not in a relaxed state. Your body has a parasympathetic and a sympathetic nervous system. Now, parasympathetic is rest and digest. This is when I'm relaxed, I feel calm, I'm more relaxed state. And sympathetic is like I'm driving a car, or I'm doing a podcast, or I'm running, or I'm standing in the kitchen doing dishes. Those are all sympathetic nervous system activities. And when those things are going on, my digestion is turned off because it's diverting energy elsewhere. So you must be in a parasympathetic state, rest and digest. If your body isn't in a relaxed state, that's the first domino in your digestive tract cascade from that north to south process. So if you're stressed and you're not in that, sympathetic state, or you standing. I have a challenge going on. I have a group, a closed Facebook group for this. It's called the Healthy Habits Challenge. And this week we're just working on digestion. And I told all of the people that in order for us to be in sympathetic, we needed, or parasympathetic state, sorry, we need to sit down when we eat. Because if you're standing, you're in a sympathetic state. And if you're sitting, you're in a more opportunity for a parasympathetic. And we really want that to be so that we can be in that rest and digest. So many of us eat like standing at the kitchen counter or in front of our computers or in the car because we're, driving somebody somewhere. So that's a really important distinction because your saliva doesn't get turned on and then you miss that salivary amylase, that enzyme that shows up in your saliva because there's been not that connection that it's time to start making digestive juices. So by the time you get kind of chewing and all that food travels down, your food's only maybe partially digested because your body is trying to catch up with the process. So that's kind of one thing that can go wrong. I see that typically with moms on the go. They're very moms. So I guess let me put it this way. Anybody that's in the service industry. So my clients who are like nurses, dental hygienists, real estate people, they're always eating on the go, trying to grab meals in between. But honestly, you could have like the most beautiful salad, but if you're eating it standing up, you're losing half of the nutrition from that. You're not going to get it. So that's one thing that can go wrong. The second thing is that your stomach doesn't have teeth. So now you maybe haven't chewed things properly. You weren't in that parasympathetic state. And now there's not, when you get there, there's these large pieces of food showing up in your stomach and there's very little acidity there because pepsin isn't activated because the salivary amylase didn't tell the body to start making hydrochloric acid. So this means that your proteins don't get broken down. And your stomach is like turning and churning all of this food. And remember, it has to be super acidic in the stomach for that valve to open. And so if we don't have that acidity there, the food just sits there. And I always tell clients, like, have you ever forgotten, put something in like a Tupperware container and you put it at the back of the refrigerator and think, oh, I'll get to that. And then you've forgotten about it. And then later on you go and you open it up and what comes out is just a woof of a yucky smell, right?
Yeah.
The worst, because that food starts breaking down and it creates this gas, and it has to go somewhere. Right. So a lot of times people with like acid reflux, it's not that they're making too much stomach acid, it's that they're not making enough. And so what can happen is that you have that food just fermenting and bubbling and gurgling in there, and then there's pressure, and that pressure builds up, and there's a valve at the bottom of your esophagus called your lower esophageal valve, and it's a two-way valve. So it'll enough gas will build up, and it'll open up that valve, and then there is a little bit of hydrochloric acid that naturally comes in, and it splashes up. But remember I said that the stomach is the only place that has that mucosal lining. So your esophagus doesn't have that. So any of that hydrochloric acid that flirts up burns. And that's what people feel is that heartburn. And it's just the sphincter opening and trying to release that gas, maldigested food. I had a client, and there's other reasons that you can have low stomach acid. There are some people that have something called Barrett's esophagus, which is an issue with their valve. So there are some other reasons. So if you're someone who's been struggling with acid reflux for a long time or GERD for a long time, it's important to rule out any sort of function of the esophagus before pursuing adding more. Because you can, we'll talk about this, you can supplement with hydrochloric acid, and for some people, or bitters, that can be really necessary. But people who have low stomach acid or they're not getting enough stomach acid really open up the gamut for dysfunction, because this is where, the 5-second rule, now you've picked up whatever and you put it in your mouth, or maybe the person who prepared your food at the restaurant didn't wash their hands, and you're, open yourself up for E. coli or H. pylori or other digestive things that can come in through food. So when that food, remember I said that when the food gets to the small intestine, there are these little finger-like protrusions and they're trying to grab the food and bring it into the blood and the lymphatic system. But if the food arrives and it's too big and it gets pushed through and it hasn't been properly broken down, the walls of the small intestine with these villi can't actually pull the nutrition through that cell. And so sometimes what can happen is you get leaky gut because you have this food coming in and it creates damage to those villi. And then the food enters extracellularly instead of intercellularly. So it's important that we honor and try to take care of those villi, because that's really how we get that nutrition into our system. And that the there's a lot of people who suffer from a slow, something called the MMC, migrating motor complex. And that's your housekeeping wave. And that the test that I talked about where you do the sesame seeds, the white sesame seeds, if you are really slow, it can be that your migrating motor complex in that small intestine that has slowed down, and that food isn't moving through at the right rate. But a lot of times this is where leaky gut will come into play. You're eating foods too fast, you're not in the right state, and so now you're doing damage to those villi, and that can create longer term issues. When people say, oh, I've always been able to eat dairy, and then one day all of a sudden I couldn't eat it anymore, I know that it's a red flag to me that there potentially there's damage in that small intestine area and needs to be reviewed and looked at. And there's a way to kind of approach that and how to help people. But the valve at the end where the small intestine and the large intestine kind of connect, that ileocecal valve, that's the last place that things can go wrong. There's more things that can go wrong. I'm just trying to hit kind of the bigger stuff. That valve, if there's undigested food, it can get the valve lodged open. And this undigested food gets stuck in between the large intestine and the small intestine. And that's when the door jams open, it allows bacteria from the colon to migrate back up into the small intestine. And we see things like SIBO or SIFO. This is where more yeast and different things can start to grow in the small intestine that aren't supposed to be there. So that's a big one. That the SIBO, SIFO, and Candida, that is definitely a harder thing to deal with, but it allows for that bacteria to get where it's not supposed to be. And take a drink of water again.
Yeah, no, this is good. This is like masterclass material here, guys.
So there's a lot of different things that we can do. Let me go back and just kind of talk a little bit about a couple clients that I've had before we talk about how to support your digestion and things that you can do at home. But just this year, I've had two kind of harder clients with digestive issues, and they, of course, they wanted to run a stool panel, and I was happy to oblige them. But the first one I ran, I'll just say her name was Karen. Karen, that's not her real name. Karen came to me and she was experiencing a lot of bloating. And she's kind of a smaller girl. So she's like, I don't really understand where all this bloating is coming from. And talk about a meticulous diet. You looked at her food journal and you would have thought that she was some sort of health rock star. But she just like watches what she eats, and she lives in a warmer climate and she's super active. So it's kind of, refreshing to get that, but it was a kind of a head scratcher. It's like, well, what's really going on here? And so we ran a stool panel, and it came back that her whole digestive tract was just like so much yeast. She had this like blowout of candida growing in her like just bad. So we had to do a 12-week protocol to kind of help rebalance that. Now, all of us have a little level of candida in our digestive tract, but it's when it overgrows that it can become problematic. And that can really lead to things like sugar cravings. So she couldn't understand why she was always like jonesing for sugar and super low energy, especially after she ate. There were those types of symptoms going on. So once we figured out that it was the candida that was really making her feel terrible, she, we went through the protocol, and everything seemed like it was getting better, but it wasn't completely resolved. And again, and this is where things like, if you've been dealing with digestive issues for a while, or some symptomatic things that have been going on, it's really important to know that you're not going to come in like a 12-week or a 6-week thing and just turn that ship around, because it can be a lot more than it's just layers that you kind of uncover. But we went through and did the protocol. We ran another stool panel. And 12 weeks later, we had gotten rid of the candida, but because that was the issue that was hiding something else underneath it, she had a ton of parasites and worms. So it was like, oh, okay. And some of those parasites are super tricky, where they will hide themselves in the wall of the stomach or in the small intestine, and they create something called a biofilm. So they protect themselves. They're tricky. So you have to go in and disrupt those biofilms so that you can get access to them to help eradicate them. We're almost to the end of that protocol, and we'll be running another stool panel at the end of this month. I'm really hoping that we don't discover anything else. But it is like this layered of, this was the primary issue that she came in with, and we can work through that. But then it could be that was just kind of a smoke screen. Once we cleared the smoke, it was really something else that's going on. And until you kind of work through those layers, you don't always know. So it's, again, it's a game of patience. But part of that is the understanding that, your body is constantly changing, and it's constantly evolving and making new cells. Every day you're losing hundreds and millions of cells, and every day you're making new cells. So when people come to me and they're like, oh my gosh, is this ever going to get better? The answer is yes, because you are in a position to make newer, healthier cells. So the opportunity is now. And if you wait, if you're waiting and you're like, oh, well, when this happens or when this happens, it's like, don't, because there's so much opportunity. Even the small things that I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes can really make a difference in impacting how your body builds with new materials. Like the example of the house, the foundation. If you can start working on the foundation, then when you start bringing in new materials, you're going to have a stronger house that you're building. So it's important to not lose hope in the process. And it's okay to take time to do it too. I think that some practitioners really rush the process. I'll do 12 weeks and then we'll take a little bit of a break and then come back and work on the next thing for another 12 weeks. And then we take a little break, because people need to have space for just to feel like they're not working on something, because that can feel really overwhelming. The body believes what the mind tells it. So if you're really in that space where you're having that negative self-talk, that's going to impact how well you're actually going to be able to achieve change in your health, especially as it relates to your digestion. Your cells are really sensitive and they're listening to you. So it's important for you to get in that space of like, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to approach this, and I'm going to give myself some time, and then I'm going to work on this, and then I'm going to come back and do it a little bit more. Your life is a journey. It's not a destination. So be okay with, working through kind of some of those hurdles, that especially as it relates to digestion, because it just takes time. And sometimes when you remove one thing, you're like, oh, it's like a box within a box. You don't know what's the next thing. You're really hoping that you open up and you're like, perfect health, but it doesn't always work out that way. So I had another client this last year. I'll call him Steve. And Steve he really suffered from a lot of gas and belching, and he couldn't figure out what was going on. We did a bunch of dietary changes, because I was sure that he was eating something that was causing the body to have this response. And so we always start there, what dietary changes can we make before going into a whole protocol? Is there something that we can take out that's creating this gas for you? So for him, it was no coffee, no alcohol, no chocolate, and no tomatoes. And so some of the higher things that can cause heartburn for people, but that didn't help at all. And he hemmed and hawed, and I said, please do a stool panel, please. Oh, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I think it was 4 months went by, and finally he said, okay, I've tried a bunch of stuff and nothing's working. And it came back that not only he had H. pylori, giardia, which is a kind of a parasite. He had dysbiotic flora growing. So you have in your floral, I call it a garden, in your microbiome garden, you have flowers, you have weeds, and you have pests. And his pests had started to overgrow. And so we needed to come in and help rebalance that. What was super interesting is that he took his stool panel to his GI doctor, and his GI doctor poo-pooed it and said, no, that's not accurate. That's not a real thing. And there's a lot of times that medical professionals are super, super important, and I don't discount their role in our lives. But if you're experiencing something, just because one person says that's not real, doesn't mean that it's not real. Because here was this person having all of these symptoms, and when you looked up the symptoms for H. pylori and the giardia, it was exactly what he was experiencing. And I was like, well, we could listen to that, or we could go down this road of healing and see if we can make this look different. So we're in the process of doing that right now and starting to kind of work through, like, what do we need to do and how do we make this look different for him? But that's part of, as you're working on some more complicated things, the approach from north to south and getting the right, things in the right way is really important. And not all of the medical professionals have been trained to think in that same way. So seek out help, or people that can help you with those digestive issues, that are willing to do a little bit more homework and spend time understanding, how many short chain fatty acids are you making, and the importance of those to your overall colon health. Because if you're not making enough over a longer period of time, that can be really stressful to the colon, and it can kind of open up more opportunity for disease. Then you don't want to create an environment that's like, oh yes, please come take residence. That's what we want to avoid. So we're trying to constantly be in that space of providing the very best in terms of homeostasis, which means perfect balance in the digestive tract. So any questions about that? Did I miss anything? And then I'll talk about how to support your digestion.
You are giving us some great information. I'm going to just send people this when I'm like, you want to know about your gut? Go here. Listen to Andre. Because a lot of this I know, but then you're talking the nitty gritty that I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And I don't know if anyone else finds this cool, but I think anyone that's really listening that's struggling with digestive health, I think just listening into you and what you have to offer just will really show them that, one, they're not crazy, that they know their body,
right.
And to go be tenacious in finding out what's wrong with their body. I've had many clients similar. They're I had someone recently that I worked with particularly for digestion as well. And she just had this, anyway, she found out, okay, it was linked to this. It was a dietary thing that we worked out. But then she started to have these other pains that I'm like, this is not digestive stuff. And she ended up finding out it was very much linked to something completely else that could have been actually very detrimental to her health. And she would not have found that if she wasn't listening to her body. And so I think what you're saying is that, yeah, you can go to doctors and stuff, but just if you know your body, I'll give an example for me. I remember when I went to Mexico, and it sounds so bad. Everyone's like, oh, you go to Mexico, you get food poisoning, whatever. But it was just a huge conference. Food was left out. So I just think everyone's body was getting used to it. But I remember I'm like, I have food poisoning. And I remember exactly where it was and what it was. I just, by that point, I knew a little bit. I went to the doctor and I was like, listen, I have an infection in my lower intestine and you need to help me. I know that's what it is because it's right here. And he's like, sure enough, there is some overgrowth right there. I'm like, okay, kill that. And so just really understanding and listening to your body, you're the only one that can really say that. But I think as even what you've been sharing is that over time you start to get more familiar, because I think we've just ignored our bodies for so long that we actually don't know what it's saying. and to just give ourselves time to be reacquainted, like you're going on a date with your body. I don't know, just give yourself time to really coming back to that place, right?
Yeah. And a lot of my clients, when they start working with me, they're like, I don't know. And then they hear those questions later and they're like, I was driving in the car and I remembered something you asked me.
Yes.
That does happen. Or,
yeah.
So, yeah. And sometimes it's just somebody coming along and asking the right questions to you.
Right.
I'm an expert, but I certainly don't claim to know everything.
Right.
And, I'm
Me either.
constantly learning. And this field is like, I spend so much time learning about gut bacteria. It like blows my mind, the different studies that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
An example is a client that I had about 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, was working with her. We worked together for like a year and we could not figure out, we thought she had SIBO, then it was H. pylori. Then we did an anti-parasite. We did all of these different things. Nothing was getting rid of it. She was like this big around, like a tiny, tiny little girl. And she looked 9 months pregnant. She was a school teacher and all the kids were like, when are you having your baby? And she's like, I'm not pregnant. And it was so frustrating. She ended up, we stopped working together because she moved to Dubai. And it was too hard to like get her the right supplements and all that. So she ended up working with a doctor in Dubai. And long story short, she came back and just sent me a message. And what was causing it, are you ready, was an infection from a surgery that she had in her jaw 5 years ago. It was harboring a bacteria in her jaw. Wow. And once they got rid of this bacteria that was in her jaw, like that had taken residence, the bloating went away in 3 days.
Oh so my gosh.
You got to keep pushing. And she was relentless.
Mm-hmm.
That the dental work, was super, super expensive, but to finally have an answer.
Right.
It wasn't actually, it's not, a lot of times it's the gut, but there's something in there that's out of balance. And, foundationally it'll affect let me rephrase that. It'll affect your foundations if you don't find the root cause. So you really want a practitioner to work with that's going to be relentless about, where I understand you're having diarrhea, or I understand that you're constipated, or I understand that you're having gas or abdominal pain, and I hear you, but I need to understand where it's stemming from and what is ultimately that root cause. It's super important that you find people that, if that's a concern, to, be, like you said, be relentless about finding someone that's going to listen to you, because a lot of times we're not crazy. We really aren't. We really aren't.
So then tell us what are the couple things that we can do to start caring for our gut?
Yeah. So let's talk about the obvious. So I have five things. The first one is sit down, eat slow, and chew your food. So I talked about this in the very beginning. A lot of us are too rushed. We're standing, we're eating on the go. Commit to yourself that you'll sit down and that you'll eat your food, and give yourself 10 minutes at the very least. Half hour is like perfect, but if you can't do that, can you, and some people are like 10 minutes, that's 30 minutes a day for 3 meals. That's not a lot of time in the scheme of things. So 10 minutes, 3 times a day, sit down, eat slowly, and chew your food. Remember that salivary amylase is the first domino in your digestive cascade. So you really want to be spending time chewing, and we can't do it fast. I have a 20-year-old son, and he sometimes will be eating so fast, and I yell at him. I'm like, "Why don't you just go take that and throw it into the toilet?" Because that's exactly what's going to happen anyway. I'm like, you're going to get nothing from that food. But now all of my kids, they kind of joke that I like the sit down person. But the other thing is to eat off of a plate and with a fork. I think too many of us are trying to grab things and go with our hands. And so, commit to slowing your food eating down. The second thing is get the right amount of water every day. So half your body weight in ounces. So if you're 100 pounds, that's 50 ounces of water. But drink slowly throughout the day. Too many clients are people that I see, they want to chug. They're like, oh, I had 8 ounce glasses of water, which sounds great, but they drank all 8 of those ounces at the same time. And your body really has a hard time absorbing that much water. It's really 4 ounces every 15 minutes is the most you can take in. And you'll notice you're drinking too much water if you're in the bathroom more than once an hour. So that's your body is just kind of flushing. Now, sometimes that can be appropriate. So like if you've been sick or, you know, there's situations and times where you do want to get more hydration. But for the most part, we really want to just keep it, you know, slow and steady throughout the day. All of your digestive juices are dependent on hydration. So if you're dehydrated, you're not going to be able to make enough hydrochloric acid. You're not going to be able to make enough things to, you know, get those digestive juices going. So, and it helps keep everything lubricated and working well. So the way your organs, you don't want your organs rubbing together because you're dehydrated. So that's number 2. Number 3 is, I think we're in this, and this might be a little controversial. I'll just throw that out there. But allow 3 to 4 hours between eating. So a lot of us are like snacking all day long, and we never let the digestive system actually do its job. So it's like, you know, you're asking it to, it's like keeping the car running even when you're not driving it. You know, while initially that might be okay, over a period of time, it's going to run things down. So allowing for 3 to 4 hours between feedings enables something, that migrating motor complex, to do its job, this housekeeping wave, to kind of help push things through. If you have blood sugar issues or are diabetic, that might not be possible for you because you need to do a little bit more to manage your blood sugars. But do the best you can if you don't have those issues to try to do, you know, breakfast and a lunch and a dinner. Some people need to have a snack, especially between lunch and dinner, if they're going to eat dinner later. That's, you know, then okay. But try to keep that between 3 to 4 hours. And kind of with that, do a 12-hour fast each night. So stop eating like a couple hours before bed. You really want, when you go to bed and you're in the perfect parasympathetic state, remember, rest and digest, that's when your body goes and it does all of the repair work. That's when your body does restoration. And if your body is digesting food, that's energy diverted away from repair. So you want to give yourself that 12-hour window. It has a second benefit of it resets your insulin receptors at the cellular level. So that means that all of your cells are a little bit more sensitive, and you'll utilize the nutrition that you do get more efficiently by allowing for that 12-hour fast. So that's my number 3. Number 4 is fiber. Not enough people get enough fiber, or people don't get enough fiber. Many of us are eating things that are very simple to digest. That fiber feeds that good bacteria in our colon, and we want food for them because that's what's going to make those short chain fatty acids. And those short chain fatty acids are really important to our overall system. And we want that healthy colon, and we want that healthy small intestine. So 25 grams of fiber a day for women and 30 grams of fiber a day for men is a good starting place. And if you don't know if you're getting enough fiber, if you tend to be, your stools are a little bit looser, or you're not an efficient pooper, when that meaning that you go in, you should be an efficient pooper. Ideally, you want to go into the bathroom, sit down, do your business, and get up. But if there's a little bit of lingering, or you're having a hard time and you're having to, you know, push, then that could be a sign of fiber, not enough fiber. So you do want to look to see and make sure that you're getting enough fiber. And then my 5th tip is once a quarter, so every 3 months or so, keep a food journal for a week. You can learn a lot about your body. And when I mean food journal, I mean food, mood, and poop. You got to log all those for at least 7 days, because you might be eating foods that are causing stress to your system, but you've become so assimilated to what that stress is that you can't even acknowledge it. Sometimes people will come to work with me. I have them keep a food journal for that period of time. And then for the 7 days prior to coming to meet with me, and they're like, oh, you know, every time I eat olives, I get a headache. I think I might be. And then I'm like, oh, well, let's take those out then. So you can learn and identify food sensitivities. You can also, if you use an online app like MyFitnessPal or MyPlate, you can actually see how much fiber you're getting. You'll see that logged for you. So that's a good way to check, to know. If you're like, well, how do I figure out my fiber? If you food journal, you'll be able to look. And you can do it for just a couple days, or even just enter in a day, yesterday or last week of day, so you can check to see. And what I like to tell people is Your body is keeping a food journal every day, whether you write it down or not. So don't sit there and have that conversation with yourself. I'm like, well, I don't can write it down, because your body already wrote it down. If you put it in your mouth and you ate it, it's been written down. It's written right here. So go ahead and write it down, because it's really just a tool. It's not meant to be shaming or condemning. It's really just a tool, a points for you to have something to look at, to be able to make changes from. So if you can look at it like that, I think it's a great way for you to understand, like, how is your body doing? You know, I can see, oh, I had a bowel movement on Monday. Oh, but I skipped Tuesday and I didn't have a bowel movement until late on Wednesday. And that seems to be typical for me. Well, then that could be, you know, you don't want stool sitting in the colon, but a lot of times we don't stop and pay attention to that unless we really like write it down and be focused on it. So those are my ways to support your digestion. Those are some simple things.
Man, I have so many things to work on. I'm just kidding. But I am guilty too. Like some meals, like if I'm eating with my husband, I will definitely sit down, because he's all about that. He's actually all about like, no, we just need to sit down and eat. But when I'm not, and during the day, I'm like, oh, just eat quick, right? And I feel the difference, just like you're saying. And it just doesn't feel good. And I think food's meant to be enjoyed, and how we're going to enjoy it if we're just eating it rushly. So I know that there are a few things from this that I'm going to work on. And you just have so many great tips. I think that everyone needs to make sure they listen to this over and over and take notes on just really caring for your gut. So I know you have a freebie that could help. Yeah, can you share us a little bit about that?
Yeah. If you go to my website, it's my name, AndreaDahlman.com. And at the bottom, I have a 5-day Mastering Your Gut Health like educational series. So it's a little bit more in depth, talking about things like probiotics and just more information, so that people can, you know, implement some changes that are real practical to move their health forward in the area of digestion.
Yeah. Awesome. And then so tell us where people can find you on the World Wide Web and social media.
Yeah. So my website, like I said, is AndreaDahlman.com. I am on social media. My Facebook and my Instagram are Redeeming Nutrition. So you can find me through that. Those are my.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes, this was literally like some great material. That's
awesome.
I know. So good.
I hope that people start with that foundation, so that they can have something that they're building off of, because it's really frustrating to go in and change your diet and not see those
right
changes.
Yeah. So everyone, be sure to check out Andrea's resources in the blog post. Be sure to also join the Healthy Body community for women, where we can unpack some of this stuff and this podcast. And yeah, just be sure to check out her stuff if you have had any, and share this episode. I just think gut health and all of the things you've talked about can just shift so much for so many people. So anyone listening, please share it to a friend, a family member that you think it could support. So thank you so much, Andrea.
You're welcome.
Thank you.